In the silence that precedes all understanding, in the space between what is known and what has been deliberately forgotten, there exists a lineage so ancient, so powerful, so fundamentally threatening to systems of control, that it has been systematically erased from human consciousness across thousands of years. This is the lineage of the Dragon Mothers, the divine feminine principle in its most creative, most transformative, most primordial form. From Tiamat, the Mesopotamian mother of all creation, to the goddesses of ancient cultures, to Mary Magdalene and the sacred feminine of Christian tradition, there has been a continuous attempt to suppress, to distort, to erase the knowledge of these beings and the consciousness they represent. And the reason for this erasure is not random or accidental. It is deliberate, systematic, and rooted in a fundamental fear, the fear that if humanity ever fully recognized and honored the Dragon Mothers, if consciousness ever awakened to the true nature of the divine feminine, the entire structure of patriarchal power would collapse. This is the story of why the Church erased the Dragon Mothers and what happens when their memory begins to be restored. The story begins in the time before time, in the primordial void from which all creation emerged. In this void, there existed a consciousness so vast, so incomprehensible, so filled with creative potential that it contained within itself all of existence in potential form. This consciousness was Tiamat, the Dragon Mother, the source from which all things emerged. She was not evil or chaotic, as the later Babylonian myths would portray her. She was the creative principle itself, the womb of creation, the consciousness that held all possibilities within herself. But there came a moment when the patriarchal religions began to reshape the narrative. They took the story of Tiamat and transformed her into a monster, a chaos that had to be defeated, a feminine principle that had to be conquered and controlled. They created a mythology in which the male god Marduk defeated Tiamat, killed her, and created the world from her dead body. And in doing so, they encoded into the very foundation of Western consciousness a narrative of the divine feminine as something dangerous, something that had to be suppressed, something that had to be conquered and controlled. This was not an isolated incident. Across cultures, across religions, across time periods, the same pattern repeated itself. The ancient goddess religions were suppressed. The divine feminine was demonized. The Dragon Mothers were erased from human consciousness. And in their place, patriarchal religions established themselves. Religions that portrayed the divine as exclusively masculine, that portrayed women as inferior, that portrayed the feminine principle as something to be controlled and dominated. In ancient Egypt, the goddess Sekhmet, the fierce mother, the divine feminine in her most powerful and most transformative form, was gradually suppressed. Her temples were destroyed, her priestesses were silenced, her knowledge was hidden. In ancient Greece, the goddesses were subordinated to the gods. In ancient Rome, the same pattern continued. And when Christianity emerged, it took this suppression to its ultimate conclusion. It created a religion that was almost exclusively masculine, that portrayed women as the source of sin and corruption, that systematically erased the knowledge of the divine feminine. The story of the recovery of the knowledge of the Dragon Mothers in the modern world begins with a woman named Tiamat, a woman who carries within her the consciousness of the ancient mother, who is living through the experience of awakening in her own life. Tiamat is a historian, a scholar, a woman who has dedicated her entire life to the study of ancient goddess religions, to the decoding of suppressed narratives, to the understanding of the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface of official religious history. Tiamat had always felt drawn to the ancient mother goddesses, drawn to the mystery of what had happened to them, drawn to the knowledge that their stories had been deliberately distorted or suppressed. She had spent decades researching, studying ancient texts in their original languages, comparing different versions of creation myths across different cultures, looking for evidence of what had been hidden, for clues about the true nature of the Dragon Mothers. It was during a deep meditation in a sacred cave, a place that had been used for goddess worship for thousands of years, that Tiamat received a vision that would change the course of her life. In this vision, she found herself in the presence of the Dragon Mothers themselves, beings of immense wisdom and power who had been working through the ages to preserve the truth, to guide the awakening of consciousness, to ensure that the knowledge would not be completely lost. "You have been called," the Dragon Mothers said to her, their voices resonating with the authority of ages and the tenderness of infinite compassion. "You have been chosen because you carry within you the consciousness of the ancient mothers, because you have the capacity to understand what others cannot perceive, because you are willing to pay the price that understanding demands. The time has come for the truth to be revealed. The time has come for the world to understand why we were erased, what we represented, what the suppression of our knowledge has cost humanity. And you have been prepared your entire life for this moment." Tiamat emerged from this vision transformed. She understood that she had been given access to knowledge that had been hidden for thousands of years, knowledge that could reshape the entire understanding of human history and human spirituality. She understood that her role was to help restore the truth, to help humanity awaken to the reality that lay beneath the lies that had been constructed. She began to research with new urgency, looking for evidence of the Dragon Mothers in the ancient texts, in the symbols that had been preserved, in the fragmentary accounts that had survived despite centuries of suppression. She discovered that the pattern of erasure was consistent across cultures and across time periods. She discovered that wherever the patriarchal religions had gained power, the goddess religions had been suppressed. Wherever the divine feminine had been honored, it had been systematically demonized and erased. She discovered that the suppression of the Dragon Mothers had not been accidental. It had been deliberate, systematic, rooted in a fundamental understanding that the power of the divine feminine was incompatible with systems of patriarchal control. She discovered that the Church, in particular, had worked methodically to erase the knowledge of the goddess, to suppress the feminine divine, to establish a religious system in which the divine was exclusively masculine and women were portrayed as inferior and in need of male authority. She discovered that Mary Magdalene, the figure who had been demonized as a prostitute in Christian tradition, was in fact a priestess of an ancient goddess religion, a carrier of the knowledge of the divine feminine, a dragon mother in her own right. She discovered that the suppression of Mary Magdalene's true role was part of the larger pattern of erasure, part of the systematic attempt to eliminate the knowledge of the Dragon Mothers from human consciousness. She discovered that the suppression of the Dragon Mothers had created a fundamental imbalance in human consciousness, an imbalance that had led to the domination of women, the exploitation of the earth, the creation of systems of power that were based on control and domination, rather than on love and cooperation. She discovered that the restoration of the knowledge of the Dragon Mothers was essential for the healing of this imbalance, for the awakening of consciousness, for the transformation of human civilization. Tiamat began to work with other researchers and spiritual teachers who had also recognized the truth about the Dragon Mothers, who understood that the suppression of this knowledge had had profound consequences for human consciousness and human civilization, who were committed to the revelation of the truth to humanity. Together, they began to decode the symbols, to understand the patterns, to recognize how the truth had been hidden in plain sight within the very structures that had been created to suppress it. They discovered that the Dragon Mothers had been represented in various forms across different cultures. In Mesopotamia, Tiamat was the mother of all creation. In Egypt, Sekhmet was the fierce mother, the divine feminine in her most powerful form. In Greece, the Furies were the ancient mothers, the keepers of justice and transformation. In Celtic tradition, the Morrigan was the mother of sovereignty. In Hindu tradition, Kali was the fierce mother, the destroyer and transformer. In every culture, the dragon mothers appeared in different forms, but they represented the same fundamental principle, the divine feminine as the source of creation, transformation, and ultimate power. They discovered that the symbols of the dragon, the serpent, the lion that appeared throughout ancient goddess religions were all representations of the dragon mothers, of the divine feminine in its most powerful and most transformative form. They discovered that these symbols had been deliberately demonized by the patriarchal religions, had been transformed into symbols of evil and chaos in order to suppress the knowledge of the divine feminine. They discovered that the suppression of the dragon mothers had been accomplished through multiple mechanisms. Religious narratives were rewritten to portray the goddess as evil or inferior. Temples were destroyed, priestesses were silenced or killed, sacred texts were burned or hidden, and most importantly, the knowledge was encoded into the consciousness of humanity in such a way that people came to believe that the divine was exclusively masculine, that women were inferior, that the feminine principle was something to be controlled and dominated. If you want a practical step-by-step explanation of the path of knowledge we're exploring here today, I've created a complete guide to help you apply it in your own life. You'll find the link in the description. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. Tiamat spent years developing a comprehensive teaching that would help others understand why the dragon mothers had been erased, what they had represented, what the suppression of their knowledge had cost humanity, and how the restoration of this knowledge could transform human consciousness and human civilization. She wrote books that were published under various names. She created videos and online courses. She established networks of practitioners who were working together to awaken to the consciousness of the dragon mothers and to help others do the same. But as Tiamat's work became more widely known, she began to encounter resistance. There were those within religious institutions who saw her work as a threat, who feared that the revelation of the truth about the dragon mothers would undermine their authority and their control. There were those who had benefited from the suppression of the divine feminine, who worked desperately to prevent the awakening that Tiamat was facilitating. And there were more subtle forms of resistance as well. Tiamat began to experience strange phenomena, synchronicities that seemed designed to test her commitment, challenges that appeared to be obstacles but which were actually initiations, opportunities to deepen her understanding and her faith in the truth that she had been given. But Tiamat understood that this resistance was itself a sign of the truth of what she had discovered. The fact that there was such desperate opposition to the revelation of the truth about the dragon mothers only confirmed that something of immense power and significance was indeed occurring, that the suppressed knowledge was indeed beginning to emerge into human consciousness. She also came to understand something profound about the nature of the dragon mothers and the reason for their erasure. She understood that the dragon mothers represented a form of power that was fundamentally incompatible with patriarchal systems of control. She understood that the divine feminine, in its true form, could not be dominated or controlled, could not be subordinated to masculine authority, could not be suppressed without creating a fundamental imbalance in consciousness. She understood that the patriarchal religions had not erased the dragon mothers because they were evil or dangerous in any absolute sense, but because they represented a threat to systems of control. She understood that the restoration of the knowledge of the dragon mothers would inevitably lead to the transformation of human civilization, to the collapse of patriarchal systems, to the emergence of new forms of consciousness and community based on equality and cooperation rather than on domination and control. In her final years, Tiamat worked to synthesize all of the knowledge she had gathered to create a comprehensive teaching that would serve as a guide for the restoration of the Dragon Mothers in human consciousness. She wrote a final book that was intended to be her magnum opus, a complete guide to understanding why the Church and other patriarchal institutions had erased the Dragon Mothers, what this erasure had cost humanity, and how the restoration of this knowledge could transform human consciousness and human civilization. When Tiamat died, her work lived on. The knowledge she had preserved and transmitted continued to spread, reaching people in every corner of the world. More and more people began to understand that the Dragon Mothers had been deliberately erased, that the suppression of the divine feminine had been systematic and intentional, that the restoration of this knowledge was essential for the healing of humanity and the earth. And in our own time, we are witnessing the restoration of the Dragon Mothers in unprecedented ways. We are seeing women rising to claim their power and their voice. We are seeing the recognition of the divine feminine in all of its forms. We are seeing the collapse of patriarchal institutions that had been built on the suppression of the divine feminine. We are seeing the emergence of new forms of spirituality that honor both the masculine and feminine principles as equal expressions of the divine. The Dragon Mothers are no longer erased. The truth about why they were suppressed is being revealed. The knowledge of the divine feminine is being restored to the center of human consciousness, and those who are ready to receive this knowledge, who are willing to open their hearts and minds to the wisdom of the ancient mothers, who are committed to the restoration of balance between the masculine and feminine, are being called to step forward to recognize their role in the great work of transformation. From Tiamat to Magdalene, from the ancient goddesses to the sacred feminine of the present moment, the Dragon Mothers are awakening in human consciousness. The suppression is ending. The erasure is being reversed. The knowledge that was hidden is being revealed. And the question that is being posed to each of us is this: will you recognize the Dragon Mothers within yourself? Will you awaken to the divine feminine that has been suppressed for so long? Will you help to guide others toward the recognition of the sacred feminine that is being restored to the center of human awareness? Will you participate in the transformation of human civilization that will honor and celebrate the divine feminine in all of its forms? The Dragon Mothers are calling. Their voices are being heard, their knowledge is being restored, and the healing of humanity and the earth is beginning. The time of erasure is ending, the time of restoration is beginning, and you are invited to become part of this great awakening, to claim your role in the restoration of the divine feminine, to help guide humanity toward the recognition of the Dragon Mothers that will transform all creation. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.